That Thanksgiving night, they told me to sleep in the shed to keep the dining table tidy. I thought I was used to being excluded. That ended when I lifted the plate and found an antique silver key taped to the underside. It was engraved with a single L, and their entire family tree immediately capsized. My name is Summer Allison. I am 30 years old. For 7 years, I had successfully maintained absolute radio-silent distance from Cedar Ridge, Ohio. 7 years of building a life, a career, and a spine, all funded by the sheer, spiteful determination to never again be the girl they sent to the shed. And yet, here I was, pulling my modest rental car into the familiar driveway at 6:15 in the evening, precisely on time for the Thanksgiving performance. The old suburban house, the one I'd never been allowed to call home, was lit from within, glowing against the bruised November twilight. The picture window in the dining room framed them all like a perfect, moving portrait. I could hear the muffled roar of a football game on the television, a sound so intrinsically linked to this house, it felt like part of the foundation. I cut the engine and sat in the sudden, heavy silence. The air in the car smelled sterile, like rental plastic. The air outside, which leaked in as I finally opened the door, was a thick, complex assault. Damp, decaying leaves, chimney smoke, and underneath it all, the rich, unavoidable scent of roasting turkey and Raymond's lemon-scented wood polish. It was the smell of every holiday exclusion I had ever known. My hand was shaking as I lifted the grocery store pumpkin pie from the passenger seat. My ticket of admission. Before my knuckles even grazed the wood, the door swung open. Raymond Locke, my stepfather, stood silhouetted in the doorway. He is a man carved from hard angles and quiet control, someone who commands a room not by raising his voice, but by lowering it. He wore his holiday best tan sweater, his face a mask of polite, managerial tolerance. "Summer, you came?" It was not a welcome. It was an acknowledgement of an inconvenient variable. Raymond. He stepped aside, a curt gesture. As I crossed the threshold, my mother, Nora, materialized from the hallway. She was a pale, nervous watercolor in a beige cardigan, her hands twisting a dish towel. Her eyes, the same ones I see in my own mirror, met mine for a fleeting, panicked half-second before dutifully skittering away to Raymond's shoulder. "Oh, honey, you're here. We're so glad. It's just—" Her voice trailed off, as it always did, swallowed by the fear of saying the wrong thing. "Hi, Mom." I handed her the pie. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Oh, lovely. Just lovely. I'll just put this in the kitchen." She scurried away, a retreat disguised as a task. Then, the main event, my half-brother, Trent, the golden boy, bounded in from the den, enveloping the foyer in a cloud of expensive, sharp cologne. "Summer! Wow. Look at you. Been a long time." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was less a hug and more a proprietary pat. "You've got to come see the new truck. Just got it detailed. And listen, the condo project finally broke ground. We're talking 60 units by next fall." Trent is the star. He is Raymond's biological son from a previous marriage, but he is the son my mother raised while I was also present. He inherited Raymond's ambition, but none of his subtlety. Everything about him was loud. The watch, the laugh, the brand new pickup that was, I was certain, blocking me in the driveway. "That's great. Trent," I said, my voice flat. It was the only armor I had. We moved toward the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of Nora's anxiety. The good china with the gold rims, the heavy crystal glasses, the suffocatingly perfect floral centerpiece. My aunt and uncle were there, and a few cousins, all smiling, all talking over each other. Raymond moved to the head of the table, picking up the electric carving knife. "All right, everyone, let's find our seats." I scanned the table. I saw the hand-lettered place cards for everyone. I saw the empty chair where my mother would sit, the one where Raymond would sit, the one for Trent. And I saw, with the cold, sinking clarity of a stone dropping through ice, that there was no chair for me. The chatter died down as they noticed me standing, the only one not moving to a seat. My mother's face went white. She looked at Raymond, her eyes wide with a familiar silent plea. Raymond let the silence stretch, a conductor holding a dramatic pause. He set the knife down with a deliberate, soft click. "Summer," he said, his voice laced with a performer's regret. "It appears we've had a miscalculation. Nora, didn't you—" My mother flinched. I just—" Raymond waved a dismissive hand. "It doesn't matter. The fact is, Trent's friend couldn't make it, but we'd already set the leaf. We just don't have the physical space for another chair without it looking disorderly." Disorderly, that was the word. I was the disorder. "We have a plate for you, of course," he continued, picking up a heavy-duty paper plate from the sideboard. "But the table is simply too crowded. We can't have it looking a mess. Would you mind terribly taking this out to the shed? Just to keep things tidy for the main meal. We'll bring you dessert later." The room was utterly still. Trent was suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his plate. My aunt was examining her cuticles. I was 30 years old. I had a degree in mechanical engineering. I ran a logistics department for a national shipping firm, and I was being invited to eat in the shed. My voice, when it came out, was a stranger's, calm, level, and ice cold. "The shed is fine." Nora's shoulders slumped, a tiny movement of simultaneous relief and shame. She piled the plate high: turkey, mashed potatoes, a jellied slice of cranberry sauce, and handed it to me with a plastic fork and knife. Her hand was trembling. She wouldn't look at me. The back door clicked shut behind me, sealing me into the cold. The November night air was sharp, biting at my cheeks. The grass was stiff with frost. The shed was at the far end of the yard, a dark metal box squatting in the shadows. I pulled the sliding door open. The screech of metal on metal was loud in the quiet. The smell hit me first, a thick, layered scent of damp concrete, old gasoline, rust, and bags of lawn fertilizer. A single, bare bulb hung from a rafter, buzzing audibly and casting a weak, sickly yellow light. It was cold, a deep, penetrating dampness that the house never had. Rusty shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of paint cans, spiderwebs, and things long forgotten. A lawnmower sat in the center, gleaming slightly with spilled oil. In the far corner, on a stack of firewood, was a pile of old folded blankets. I pulled the top one off. It was a faded plaid wool, stiff with mildew and smelling faintly of motor oil. My seat was an overturned 5-gallon bucket. I sat. I wrapped the filthy blanket around my legs, the wool scratching my skin through my jeans. The cold from the concrete floor seeped instantly into the soles of my shoes. This was my seat. The gasoline smell wasn't entirely unwelcome. It reminded me of why I was always the disorder. I loved the shed, not this one, but my grandfather's. When I was 12, I had taken apart the toaster to see how the heating elements worked. Raymond had found me, screwdriver in hand, the kitchen counter littered with springs and wires. He didn't yell. He just looked at me with that crushing disappointment. "That's not for girls. Summer, stop being unrealistic. Go help your mother." Unrealistic. Delusional. That was his word for me. But my grandfather, Walter Hale, he understood. He was my mother's father, the eccentric one who had built a local farming co-op into an agricultural empire. He and my mother hadn't spoken much after she married Raymond, but he saw me. He was the one who sent the toolkits. They would arrive in plain brown boxes, no return address, shipped to my school so Raymond wouldn't find them. Ratchet sets, soldering irons, precision gauges. He was the one who taught me that the world wasn't magic. It was mechanics. It could be understood. It could be taken apart and put back together. The final, definitive crack in the family facade had happened when I was 16, the county science fair. I had designed and built a small-scale, closed-loop hydrostatic power generator. I won first place. I came home with the oversized blue ribbon and a scholarship check for $500. I was vibrating, so proud I thought I might burst. I found them in the den. Trent was sulking on the sofa. He had entered his project, a styrofoam model of the solar system, hastily painted, and hadn't even placed. I held up the ribbon. I won. My mother started to smile, a weak, uncertain light. But Raymond's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Put that away, right now." I froze. "Don't show off, Summer," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're just making Trent feel bad. Go to your room." I looked at my mother, my eyes burning, begging her, "Say something." She just looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "He's right, honey. It's just better to be modest." My success was not a victory. It was an insult. My intelligence was not a gift. It was a disruption to the family's preferred narrative. That was the night I stopped trying to earn a seat at their table. I focused on building my own. I got the scholarships. I went to a college 1,000 miles away. I never asked them for $1. I hadn't looked back. Until my mother called, weeping, saying my grandfather Walter had passed away, and if I didn't come for this Thanksgiving, just this one, she didn't know what she would do. So I came, and I was sitting on a bucket, in a shed. From across the yard, I heard a sudden, loud burst of laughter from the dining room. It was Trent's laugh, loud and braying. It cut through the night air, sharp and bright. It felt like a dull knife twisting in my ribs. I looked down at the plate on my lap. The turkey fat was already congealing into a waxy white film. The mashed potatoes were a cold, stiff lump. I took one bite of a dinner roll. It tasted like sawdust and gasoline. I set the plate down on the dusty workbench next to me. I sat there for a long time, maybe an hour. The single bulb buzzed. The cold was in my bones now, an ache in my joints. I wasn't just an outsider, I was garbage. I was the disorder they tidied up by putting me in the bin. Finally, I stood up, my legs stiff. I couldn't stay here. I'd grab my bag, walk past the blocked driveway, and call an Uber from the main road. I picked up the paper plate to throw it in the trash. As I tilted it, the slice of pumpkin pie slid, and I saw it. Something was stuck to the plate, hidden beneath the pie, a small square of gray duct tape. My heart, which had been a cold, dead weight in my chest, gave a sudden, hard kick. My fingers fumbled, sticky with pie filling, as I scraped the dessert away with the plastic knife. There, taped firmly to the waxy center of the plate, was a key. It wasn't a modern key. It was long, antique, and made of heavy, tarnished silver, the kind of key that opened a chest or a heavy oak door. It was cold to the touch. I pulled it free. The duct tape was old, the adhesive weak. I turned it over in the dim, yellow light. The bow of the key was ornate, and engraved in the center was a single, elegant, Gothic letter L. And below it, smaller but unmistakable, was the Hale family crest, a stylized sheaf of wheat bound by a wheel, the symbol of Hale Manor. My grandfather's estate, the one he'd supposedly left to someone. I looked at the piece of duct tape still stuck to my thumb. On the sticky side, written in the shaky, familiar blue ink scrawl of my grandfather, were 5 words. "For L, don't trust the table." L. He used to call me his little mechanic. I looked back at the house, at the bright, warm rectangle of the dining room window. They were silhouettes now, passing plates, laughing, refilling glasses. A timer had just been lit. I could feel the fuse sizzling. Someone had put that plate in my hand. Someone knew I would be sent to the shed. And someone had just handed me a weapon. The shed was freezing, but I no longer felt the cold. My blood was moving, a high-frequency current thrumming just beneath my skin. I stood under the single, buzzing bulb, turning the key over in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, solid, cold steel, but with a silvery, almost luminous quality. The tarnish was deep, settled into the intricate grooves of the bow, where the Hale crest, the wheat in the wheel, was pressed. The L was clearly a later addition, hand-carved, the stroke slightly uneven, my little mechanic initial. I ran my thumb down the shaft. The bit was complex, a series of wards and notches that spoke of a high security, custom lock from a century ago. This wasn't a key for a simple door. I knew exactly what it was. Hale Manor, my grandfather's sprawling, ancient estate, was divided into wings: the main house, the servants' quarters, the conservatory, and then there was the orchard wing. It was a stone addition, set back from the main property, windowless and always locked. As kids, Trent and I had whispered it was haunted. As I got older, I heard the family rumors. It wasn't haunted. It was Walter's vault, his real office, the place no one, not even my mother, was allowed to enter. This was the key. My grandfather, Walter Hale, the hidden tycoon, the man who started with 1 acre of apple trees and built an agricultural network that supplied 3 states, all while his neighbors still thought of him as a simple farmer. He had died last year. Quietly. A heart attack, they said. I was in the middle of a massive logistics overhaul at my firm and couldn't get away for the funeral. I'd sent flowers. My mother had called, her voice tight, and said the services were simple. Now, I looked at the note again, the ghost of it on the tape I'd wadded in my fist. Forel, don't trust the table. It wasn't a warning. It was a confirmation, a validation of every holiday, every report card, every single interaction I had ever had in that house. He always saw. The key felt like a component I hadn't known was missing, and like any missing component, its sudden appearance made me reevaluate the entire machine. My phone. My fingers were stiff, but I pulled it from my pocket. The screen was cracked. The case was practical. I ignored the low battery warning and went straight to my contacts. Blocked numbers. I scrolled past the endless list of spammers, and I found it. A number I had blocked maybe 6, 7 months ago, just after Walter died. It had sent me 3 texts, 1 a day, with no words. The first was a key emoji, the second, a sheaf of wheat, the third, an apple. I'd assumed it was a bot or a sick joke. I blocked it. Now my thumb hovered over the unblock button. I pressed it. I stared at the screen. The old messages populated. Key, wheat, apple, nothing new. I had the sudden, chilling feeling that I had been tested and had failed, but the key was in my hand. The test was still running. I couldn't stay in the shed. I had the key. I had the tape. But I had no context. I needed to see their faces one more time. Knowing what I knew, I slid the key into the deep pocket of my jeans. I threw the paper plate, with its cold, congealed food, into the trash can by the workbench. I took one last look at the oily blankets and the single bulb. Then I slid the heavy door open and walked back toward the house. The walk across the frosty lawn was different. I was no longer the banished daughter. I was an infiltrator. The laughter was louder now. I slipped in the back door, into the kitchen. The main meal was clearly over. They had moved on to dessert. My own store-bought pie sat on the counter, untouched, still in its box. My mother was serving her own homemade pecan and pumpkin pies. She was at the sink, hands plunged into soapy water, her back to the dining room. She was alone. This was my chance. I leaned against the counter. She didn't turn, just flinched, startled. Mom. Oh, Summer. You frightened me. Was it all right? It was cold, I said, my voice flat. I let the silence sit. She scrubbed a plate, her knuckles white. Mom, I tried again, my voice softer, more surgical. What happened with Grandpa Walter's will? She dropped a silver fork. It clattered loudly into the stainless steel basin. She froze, her back rigid. Summer, please, not tonight. It was all very straightforward. Was it? I never heard anything about it. I was just curious. Her eyes, frantic, darted to the doorway, as if Raymond could hear us over the noise of the television and Trent's laughter. He left the manor to a community trust. Dear, she whispered, her hands returning to the water. For the town, it was what he wanted. It's all fine. Everything is fine. Don't stir things up, honey, please. She turned her back to me completely, scrubbing a non-existent spot on a crystal glass. The conversation was over. She was a locked door, but Raymond had the key. I turned to leave, and almost ran straight into my younger cousin. May, she was 19, always glued to her phone, but she had her mother's eyes, meaning she watched everything. "Hey," she whispered, pulling me into the shadow of the pantry. The smell of cinnamon and cloves was thick. "That was so gross what they did. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, May, just cold." "Listen," she said, her voice dropping, her eyes flicking to the dining room, just as my mother's had. "This is going to sound weird, but something really strange is going on with the Hale side." My pulse gave a hard single kick. "What do you mean?" "Walter's lawyer. That really old guy, Mr. Sullivan. He was here, like, a month ago, on a Saturday. I was coming to drop something off for your mom, and he was leaving, and he looked mad. And then I heard Raymond in the study. I think he was on the phone with Trent. He was yelling. Something about overriding the codicil and the girl's inheritance. It was intense. The girl's inheritance." My stomach hollowed out. "May, did you hear anything else?" "No, I got out of there. But it was weird, right? I thought he left everything to the town." "Yeah," I said, my mind racing. "Weird?" I thanked her, my voice sounding distant. I needed one more thing. I needed my grandfather's language. I slipped out the kitchen door, past the barrels of road salt, and into the detached garage. Raymond's domain. His new, oversized truck, the one Trent had been bragging about, was parked in the center, but in the back, piled in a corner and draped in a dusty tarp, were the things my mother couldn't bring herself to throw away, Walter's things. I found his old red metal toolbox. The latch was stiff, but I forced it. The smell of grease, metal, and sawdust hit me, the smell of my childhood. And there it was, taped to the inside of the lid, just as I remembered. His small, black, leather-bound notebook, the one he used for repairs. My fingers were numb, but I flipped through the pages. Schematics for a John Deere tractor, notes on crop rotation, irrigation pump diagrams. And then, the last page. It wasn't a repair, it was a floor plan, hand-drawn, in his precise, steady pencil, a diagram labeled Orchard Vault. My eyes scanned the drawing. It showed a single, heavy, circular door, my key. Door 1, Hale key L. But there was another drawing, just behind it, a second door, and a note. Door 2, Auxiliary mechanism, see Daily Journal. A second door, a mechanism. The key was only the first step. I looked at the diagram, my engineer's mind catching up. The key had grooves to open the first lock, but the diagram implied the second lock was something else, not a key, a process. I tore the page from the notebook. The paper was old, brittle at the edges. I folded it carefully and shoved it deep into my pocket with the wad of duct tape. I needed to leave, not just the garage, this house. I pulled my phone out again and took a quick, clear photo of the diagram, just in case. Then, I went to my boot. I loosened the laces of my left hiking boot, slid the heavy, cold silver key inside, and pressed it flat against the bone of my ankle. I retied the laces, pulling them painfully tight. It was there. It was safe. I walked back into the house. The warmth and noise hit me like a physical blow. Raymond was by the fireplace now, a glass of brandy in his hand, holding court. I didn't bother with excuses. I raised my voice, cutting through his story. "I'm heading out." The room quieted. My mother appeared at my elbow, her face a mask of anxious confusion. "Oh, already? But Summer, you didn't have any pie." The lie was so absurd, so pathetic, it almost made me laugh. "I'm fine. Mom, it's a long drive. Thanks for having me." Raymond just nodded at me over the rim of his glass, a curt, imperial dismissal. Trent, slouched on the sofa, waved, his eyes never leaving his phone. I didn't say goodbye to anyone else. I walked out the front door, into the cold, clean night. I got into my rental car. The engine turned over, a quiet, reliable hum. I navigated the tight turn around Trent's obnoxiously large truck and pulled onto the silent, suburban street. I drove for maybe 5 blocks, until the glow of the house was gone from my rearview mirror. I pulled over under a flickering, orange streetlight. The first, fat flakes of snow were beginning to fall, dissolving on the windshield. I cut the engine. The silence of the car was absolute. I rested my forehead on the cold steering wheel. The key in my boot was a hard, insistent pressure against my ankle. My breath fogged the glass. I counted. 1, 2, 3. Do not confront. That was their game. Their game was loud. It was emotional. It was designed to make me the disorder. My game was mechanics. My game was quiet. You don't fix a broken engine by yelling at it. You identify the parts. You understand the system. You find the point of failure. Get ahead. Understand the truth. Then flip the board. I sat up, the resolve hardening inside me. The snow was falling faster now, each flake a tiny clock ticking down. My phone, sitting on the passenger seat, suddenly lit up the dark car. My heart hammered. It was the unblocked number, a new message. It contained no emojis, just words. If you have the key, 11:47 p.m., Orchard Gate. I didn't drive back to the hotel. I couldn't. My car clock read 11:21. The text said 11:47. I had time. I drove, not to the sterile rental, but toward the dark, sleeping mass of the Hale estate. It sat on the oldest road in Cedar Ridge, a place where the trees were ancient and the money was quiet. I parked 2 blocks down, under the dense, snow-laden branches of a spruce tree, and cut the engine. The world went utterly silent, muffled by the falling snow. My phone screen glowed. 11:38. I pulled the heavy silver key from my boot. The metal was so cold it stung my palm. I transferred it to my coat pocket. My fingers wrapping around it, it felt like a weapon. It felt like a ballast. The walk was the hardest part. My boot sank into the fresh powder. The only sound the crunch, crunch, crunch of my own progress. I skirted the main driveway, staying in the deep shadows cast by the line of massive skeletal oaks. The main manor was a mountain of dark stone, every window black. I moved past the formal gardens, now just angular, snow-covered lumps. The air was sharp, smelling of iron and ice. At 11:44, I reached it, the Orchard Gate. It was exactly as I remembered from childhood, 12 feet of rusted, wrought iron spears, choked with the black, stringy vines of dead ivy. It hadn't been opened in my lifetime. It was a monument, not an entrance. I stood, my breath pluming in a thick cloud, my heart hammering a violent, fast rhythm against my ribs. 11:46. The night was holding its breath. At precisely 11:47, a thin, sharp beam of light cut through the darkness from the other side of the bars. It didn't waver. It held steady, pointing at the ground. Then, a voice, like dry leaves scraping pavement. Summer Allison? A figure emerged from the trees inside the property. He was old, stooped, wearing a thick wool coat that was far too large for him. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, holding an old-fashioned metal flashlight. I hadn't seen him in 16 years. Ezekiel? Ezekiel, my grandfather's groundskeeper, butler, and as far as I could ever tell, his only confidant, the man who had allegedly vanished immediately after the funeral. He stopped at the gate, his weathered face a web of deep lines in the harsh sidelight. He told me to wait, Ezekiel whispered, his eyes dark and sharp, scanning the street behind me. He said you would be late, but you would come. He said they would not give you a seat. Ezekiel, what is this? He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed a thick, heavy envelope through the bars. His hand, gnarled with arthritis, was perfectly steady. Walter left this for you. It was meant to be given to you by his lawyer, Mr. Sullivan. After the reading, it was blocked. Blocked? By who? By the table, he said. The words simple, heavy. Raymond, Trent, they moved very fast. They had your mother sign papers. They used your long absence against you. They thought they had it all. This, he tapped the key in my pocket, though he couldn't see it. This was Mr. Walter's bypass, his dead man's switch. He knew you were the one they would cast out. I took the envelope. It was heavy parchment, sealed with a thick disc of dark red wax, stamped with the Hale crest. My name was on the front, written in my grandfather's precise architectural script, Summer Hale Allison. Quickly now, Ezekiel muttered. The gate is for show. We don't use the gate. He motioned with the flashlight, not to the gate's massive, frozen lock, but to the thick, overgrown hedge line to its left. I followed. He led me to a place where the stone retaining wall was hidden by a curtain of dead ivy. He pulled it aside. A low, arched wooden door was set into the stone, a cellar entrance. Ezekiel produced a small, modern brass key, clicked open a heavy padlock, and pulled. The hinges screamed, a low, agonizing, metallic shriek that ripped through the silent night. "Damn it," he whispered, wincing. "They need oil." A wave of cold, complex air rolled out of the opening. It wasn't just damp. It was the smell of ancient, dry wood, of cold earth, and a faint, sweet, acidic tang. It was the smell of apples, stored for so long they had begun to ferment. "The tunnel, Ms. Summer," he said, shining the beam down 3 stone steps. I followed him down. The ceiling was low. I had to duck my head. The passage was lined with thick, rough-hewn oak beams, the floor-packed earth covered in a carpet of dry brown leaves that had been blown in and undisturbed for decades. We walked for what felt like 100 yards, in total darkness, save for the small, bouncing circle of Ezekiel's light. My skin prickled. We stopped. We were in a small, circular, subterranean room, its walls made of fitted, cut stone. In the center of the far wall stood the object from my grandfather's diagram. It was a door, a massive circular vault door, made of black steel, studded with rivets. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault from the 19th century. "Door 1, Ezekiel said, his voice hushed. He shone the light directly on the keyhole. It was large, intricate, and waiting. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to insert it. The key slid in, a perfect, oiled fit. It met resistance, then a hard stop. I turned it. There was a sound of heavy, perfectly balanced tumblers falling into place, a deep, satisfying ka-chunk. I grabbed the large steel handle and pulled. The door did not move. "Door 2, I whispered, my eyes scanning the wall. "The auxiliary mechanism." Ezekiel nodded in the darkness, a small, proud smile touching his lips. "He said you'd know. He said the engineer would read the schematic." He moved the beam of light to the right of the vault. There, set into the stone, was a small, unassuming steel plate. I ran my bare fingers over it. It was a mechanical combination lock, a simple 3-number dial, not electronic, not digital, pure, beautiful mechanics. He said the combination was the one date he knew you'd never forget. Ezekiel said, my breath hitched, my birthday, August 25th, 8:2:5. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the dial. I spun it, the clicks precise and quiet in the small room. Right, past the 0, stopping at 8, left, 1 full rotation, past the 8, stopping at 2, right, stopping at 5. I heard another sound, a soft, high-pitched click, like a pin being released. I grabbed the steel handle on the vault door. I braced myself. I pulled. With a soft, pressurized hiss, the seal broke. The massive door swung open, heavy and silent on its perfectly balanced hinges. Ezekiel did not move. "This is your place, Ms. Summer, Mr. Walter's place. I will wait." I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was different, perfectly still, dry, and cool. It smelled of cedar, old paper, and a faint trace of tobacco. Ezekiel's beam found a light switch just inside the door. He flicked it. Modern, recessed spotlights illuminated the room. It was an office. Small, but perfect, paneled in dark, rich cedar. One wall was floor-to-ceiling steel filing cabinets, each with a small typed label. The other wall held a simple, heavy oak desk. My eyes locked on the desk. There was a single, silver-framed photograph on it. It was my grandfather, younger. His face creased in a huge, rare smile. He was holding me. I must have been 4 years old. I was missing my 2 front teeth. My hair was a wild tangle, and I was holding a socket wrench. I had no memory of this photograph. A hot, sharp knot tightened in my throat. Next to the photo, 2 objects sat squarely in the center of the desk blotter. One was a thick, leather-bound planner. The cover was embossed. The second table project. The other was a single, black USB flash drive attached to a tag. The tag, in my grandfather's hand, read, "The Tabletop." I opened the planner. The first page was a handwritten note. "My little mechanic, if you are reading this, the first test is over. They sent you to the shed. Good. That's what I was counting on. Now, get to work. W. H." I flipped the page. It was full of plans, schematics, financial projections, not for generators, not for engines, for soup kitchens, for job training centers, for converting old farm storage barns into community makerspaces and workshops. I set the planner down and, my hands trembling, tore open the wax seal on the envelope Ezekiel had given me. It was a letter and a draft of a will. I scanned the dense, legal text, my eyes jumping. To my granddaughter, Summer Hale Allison, provided the conditions of the second table codicil are met in full. I found the codicil. The inheritance, Hale Manor, the orchard properties, the controlling shares of the Hale Agricultural Trust was not to be passed to the primary heir, my mother, Nora, or the secondary heir, Trent. It was to be held in a blind trust, pending a test. The exclusion test. My stomach went cold. The assets were to be granted to the designated heir, Summer, only if that heir was, by the verifiable actions of the primary and secondary heirs, physically excluded from the primary family gathering, the Thanksgiving dinner. And if said heir, having been so excluded, demonstrates a commitment not to fighting for a seat at the old table, but to building a new one for those who have no table at all. He knew them so well. He had seen it all, every humiliation, every exclusion, and he had built his entire legacy around the absolute certainty of their cruelty. "Ms. Summer," Ezekiel's voice from the tunnel made me jump. "We cannot stay long." I stepped back into the tunnel. The planner and the USB were clutched in my hand. "Ezekiel, they said the will was settled. They told my mother he left it all to a trust. For the town." Ezekiel's face was grim in the flashlight beam. "They did more than that. After Mr. Walter passed, before the official reading, Raymond and Trent petitioned the court. They used Nora's signature. They filed a motion claiming you were estranged, that you had abandoned the family, that you were unstable and unfit. They had you legally disinherited by default. They think your name is gone, erased." My blood turned to ice. "But this—" I held up the will. "That," Ezekiel said, tapping the envelope, "is the original copy, hand-delivered by Mr. Walter to me, with instructions. The copy they contested at the courthouse, it was a decoy, a performance. They think they won. They think they are just waiting for the estate to clear probate before they can break the trust and sell the land. They have no idea this vault exists. They have no idea about the second table codicil. They think they erased me. Must use the tunnel." My mind cleared. The shock evaporated, replaced by cold, hard focus. I pulled out my phone. "Hold the light," I said. I switched to the camera. I photographed the letter. I photographed every page of the will. I photographed the codicil. I photographed the schematics in the planner. I photographed the photo of me and him. I slid the USB drive into the small, hidden zipper pocket inside my coat, zipping it shut. The physical planner and the letter went back into the wooden box on the desk. "Lock it," I said. I stepped out. I swung the massive door shut. It hissed as it sealed. I spun the combination dial, randomizing it. I pulled the key from the outer lock. We walked back down the tunnel. The hinges shrieked again as Ezekiel pulled the outer door shut. He carefully, precisely, rearranged the ivy to cover it. "They are meeting with developers," he said quietly, as we stood in the snow. "The day after tomorrow. They are moving fast. They want to sell the orchard, all of it." "Let them," I said. The cold felt good. It was focusing. "What will you do now, Ms. Summer?" I looked back at the rusted gate. Then I looked toward the distant, dark shape of Raymond's house, miles away. "I'm going to play the part they gave me. I'm the disappointment, the failure, the girl who wasn't worth a chair. I'm going to let them play their entire hand. Let them get arrogant. Let them show everyone, in the bright light of day, exactly who they are." Ezekiel smiled, a rare, thin smile in the darkness. "He said you'd say that. He called you his little mechanic. She knows you have to let the engine run hot," he used to say. "You have to let it run hot before you can find the leak." He touched the brim of his cap and melted back into the trees, a ghost in the snow. I walked back to my car, the key safe in my pocket, the USB a cold, hard square against my ribs. I was no longer the excluded daughter. I was the executor. I slept in my rental car for 3 hours, parked in the sterile, fluorescent-lit lot of a 24-hour diner. I bought coffee, used the restroom to wash my face, and changed my shirt. I looked like hell. It was the perfect camouflage. I arrived back at the house at 9:30 in the morning. The smell of burnt coffee and stale air hit me as I walked in the back door. Not bothering to knock, the kitchen was a disaster zone of stacked plates and greasy roasting pans, the day after reckoning. I found them at the breakfast table, a smaller, more intimate setting in the kitchen nook. The television was on, tuned to a morning news show, the volume just loud enough to be an irritant. Raymond was at the head of the table, of course, reading the financial section of the paper, a fortress of newsprint held up between him and the room. Trent was scrolling through his phone, a spoon hovering over a bowl of sugary cereal. My mother, Nora, was standing at the counter, her back to them, clutching a coffee mug. No one looked up when I entered. I was the ghost from the shed. I walked to the coffee pot and poured myself a mug. It was scalding and bitter. "Well, look who it is," Trent said, his voice thick with smugness, his eyes still on his phone. Raymond lowered his paper by a precise, deliberate inch. His eyes, cold and assessing, met mine. "Was the shed warm enough for you, Summer?" he asked. His tone was light, casual, the same tone he might use to ask about the weather. It was a power play, a public reestablishment of the hierarchy. Trent snickered into his cereal. My mother's shoulders tensed. She did not turn around. This was the moment. This was the performance. I wrapped my cold hands around the hot mug, leaned against the counter, and gave them the person they expected to see. I wanted to apologize," I said. My voice was quiet, a little rough, as if I had been crying, which, technically, I almost had been. This got their attention. Trent actually looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He was not expecting this. Raymond's eyes narrowed. An apology was not part of his script. He was processing it, calculating. I looked at the floor, channeling every ounce of humiliation I had ever felt in this house. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice catching. "I'm sorry for making things so uncomfortable last night. I know I haven't been around, and I just showed up, and it was disruptive. I should have just, I don't know. I put you all in an awkward position. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the silence of the shed. My mother finally turned, Her face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: shock, pity, and a terrible, dawning relief. "See?" her face said. "She's not a threat. She's broken." Raymond folded his newspaper. He set it, perfectly aligned, on the table. He was in control again. "Well," he said, his voice taking on a magnanimous, fatherly tone, "that's very mature of you. Summer, we appreciate that. These things can be difficult. Family is difficult." "I know," I whispered, looking up at him, my eyes wide. I feel so out of the loop with everything. I didn't even know what happened with Grandpa Walter's estate." I let the question hang in the air, a naive, harmless little query from the broken girl. Raymond and Trent exchanged a look. It was so fast, so subtle. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it. It was a look of shared conspiracy. "Oh, that?" Raymond said, waving a dismissive hand. He picked up his coffee cup. "There's nothing to be in the loop about. It was all very simple. Walter, he was an odd man. In the end, he left a small bequest to the town library. And I believe he left each of us a postcard. From his travels in the 70s, very Walter. A postcard." The lie was so bald, so insulting in its simplicity, it almost took my breath away. He was telling me I was worth a piece of old cardboard. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "A postcard. I see." I took a sip of the terrible coffee. "It's just, I ran into May last night, and she mentioned that Mr. Sullivan was here, Grandpa's lawyer." Raymond's cup, halfway to his lips, stopped. It was a freeze, a microsecond of suspended animation. His eyes didn't move, his hand didn't shake, he just stopped. Then, just as smoothly, he continued the motion and took a sip. "Sullivan?" he said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "Yes, he was here to tie up loose ends. The library bequest. Very routine." "Oh, yeah," May said, walking into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She grabbed the cereal box. "It was weird. Though, I told Summer, you guys were not happy that day, and I saw someone, I don't know, one of Trent's friends, maybe, going into Grandpa's old office room, the one by the back stairs, the day of the funeral." Trent's head snapped up. "What are you talking about? May? You're dreaming. Go back to bed." His voice was too sharp, too fast. "I'm just saying what I saw," she mumbled, pouring cereal. Raymond shot Trent a look that could have frozen fire. "That's quite enough. We were securing Mr. Hale's personal effects. A simple, practical matter." He turned his full, undivided attention back to me. The interrogation was over. I had my data. 1. They were lying about the will. 2. The name Sullivan was a high-voltage wire. 3. They had ransacked Walter's personal office on the day of his funeral, before the will was even read. I needed to pivot. I needed to reestablish my broken persona, but also seed the next part of the test. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with a painful, desperate pity. It makes you think," I said quietly, looking into my mug. "What matters? You know, the week before I came here, I hosted a dinner, back in my city, for a community project I've been volunteering at." My mother's eyes softened. This was safe territory for her. "Oh, honey, that's lovely." "It was something," I said, letting the real memory, surface. "It's a kitchen for homeless youth. We were trying to raise funds for a new walk-in freezer, so I organized a second-table dinner. We set up a long table in the alley behind the 5-star restaurant that was our sponsor. We served the same food, to the kids, the volunteers, and the donors, all sitting together. It was..." I smiled. A small, genuine smile. It was cold, but it was good. Nora's eyes welled with tears. Genuine, real tears. "Oh, Summer, that's the most wonderful thing I've ever heard. Walter, your grandfather, he would have loved that." A sharp barking laugh cut through the moment. Raymond. He was smiling, a thin, patronizing, razor-like smile. A dinner in an alley. How very theatrical. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. Summer. It's good PR. I'll give you that. Good for the brand. The air went dead. My mother's tears froze on her face. I looked at him. I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch. And then I delivered the line. I said it calmly, not with anger, but with the simple, cold, clarifying power of the truth. If I was doing it for PR, Raymond, I said, I would have found a way to be inside the house last night. My mother made a small, strangled sound. A gasp she swallowed. Trent's jaw tightened. Raymond's smile vanished. It didn't fade. It was amputated. He stared at me, his eyes like two chips of blue ice. He had been so thoroughly in control, and I had just, with one sentence, reminded everyone in the room that he had banished his stepdaughter to a shed on Thanksgiving. I had exposed the cruelty he'd disguised as tidiness. He was furious, but Trent, as always, was the one who couldn't hold it in. You know what? Trent said, standing up so fast his chair screeched on the tile. You come in here, acting all high and mighty. That PR stunt in an alley is cute, but in the real world, you have to make real moves. You have to have capital. He was pacing now, wired and angry. He was the one who was truly rattled. That condo project I told you about? It's not just condos. It's the future of this whole damn town. But the investors, they're getting cold feet. They want more. More collateral. More seed money. He gestured wildly, his hand sloshing his cereal milk. They want proof we're serious. Trent, Raymond said, his voice a low warning. That's enough. But Trent was too far gone. No. She comes in here, judging us, after she abandoned this family. I am trying to build something, and I need to liquidate. I need to get the seed money from the orchard sale, and I need to get it now. The orchard. He had said it. I looked at him, my face a mask of what I hoped looked like naive confusion. The orchard? I said. But Grandpa Walter loved the orchard, and I thought he left it to the town. The town is an idea. Summer. Raymond cut in, his voice smooth as venom. He had recovered. He was reframing. A trust can be managed, and managing that trust, in a way that benefits the community and the family, is a complex financial matter. Trent's project is a part of that. A symbiotic development. So you're selling the orchard? A part of it, Trent snapped. The unused part. The old barns. The weird, useless stone wing. The part by the old gate. It's just sitting there. It's dead weight. We're turning it into capital. It's what he would have wanted. I let a small, worried frown crease my forehead. I was the engineer now. I was the practical, detail-oriented girl who didn't understand these big, complex ideas. I don't know, I said, shaking my head. I just remember Grandpa Walter was always so particular about that gate, about the orchard wing. I looked at Raymond, my eyes full of manufactured concern. You can do that, right? You can just sell it? I mean, are you sure the paperwork is clean? I'd hate for there to be a problem, with the gate and all, the orchard gate. The bait was set. Raymond's face darkened. Trent looked confused. What about the gate? It's a rusted piece of crap. It's not the gate, Raymond snarled. His mask of control was gone. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Trent, but his anger was for something else. It was the anger of frustration, the anger of a man who has been trying and failing to pick a lock. The gate is nothing, he spat. It's the vault, that damned vault. It's double locked. Who could possibly? He stopped, but the words hung in the air, echoing, bright and terrible. It's double locked. He knew about the vault. He knew about the double lock. He didn't know about the mechanism, the birthday, my birthday, But he knew he was locked out. He had been there. He had tried to get in. He had failed. He had just confessed everything. He stared at me, his eyes wide, realizing what he had just admitted. He had admitted his failure. He had admitted his greed. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just held his gaze. My face a perfect, tragic mask of a girl who just learned her grandfather's postcards were a lie. I looked down at my coffee. "A vault?" I whispered, as if I were horrified. I don't understand. I think I need to get some air." I set the mug down, my hand visibly shaking. I walked out of the kitchen, past my stunned mother, past Trent's furious, confused face, past Raymond's mask of pure, cold rage. I walked out the back door, into the cold, bright morning. I walked to my car, got in, and drove. I didn't look back. I pulled over on the same street I had been on last night, under the same spruce tree. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were not shaking. They were perfectly, mechanically steady. I opened a new text message to the number that had been blocked, to Ezekiel. They're impatient. They're trying to sell. They know about the vault, and they know they're locked out, ready for step 2. I hit send. I drove to the public library, the one place in Cedar Ridge with fast, free, anonymous internet and a guaranteed lack of sentimental nonsense. I found a cubicle in the back, shielded by shelves of dusty biographies. The air smelled of old paper and floor wax. It was a perfect, sterile environment for what came next. I plugged the black USB drive, the tabletop, into my laptop. The drive didn't contain a messy collection of files. It was a single, clean, self-executing program. A simple, custom-coded interface opened on my screen. It was branded with the Hale crest, the wheat and the wheel. It was my grandfather's digital vault. The interface had 3 folders: land, shares, second table. I clicked land. My screen filled with scanned, notarized documents, the original deed for Hale Manor, surveys for the 600 acres of the orchard, water rights, mineral rights, zoning maps. It was all here, a meticulous archive. I clicked shares. Spreadsheets opened, a portfolio so vast it made my stomach clench. It wasn't just the farm. Walter had owned controlling shares in regional distribution networks, cold storage facilities, even a small batch agricultural tech firm I'd actually heard of. He hadn't just been a farmer. He had owned the entire supply chain. Then I clicked second table. This folder contained only one file, a video. The file was named A Seat. I put in my earbuds. I clicked play. My grandfather's face filled the screen. He wasn't in his office. He was sitting on the tailgate of his old truck, the orchard in full, green summer bloom behind him. He looked healthy, happy. He was wearing his work clothes. He looked directly into the camera lens, as if he were looking at me, right here, in this library carrel. "Hello, my little mechanic," he said. His voice was warm, the familiar dry rumble I hadn't heard in years. "If you're watching this, it means 2 things. First, I'm gone. Don't waste time on that. It's the one mechanical failure we can't bypass." He leaned in, his eyes sharp. "Second, it means they did it. They proved me right. They didn't give you a seat at the table." He smiled, a hard, sad smile. "That's the point of this, all of it, the second table project. You see, I spent 50 years building this legacy, and I spent the last 10 watching people fight over it. People who had never built a thing. People who thought a seat at the table was something you inherited, or stole, or took from someone else. People who thought the goal was just to get a chair." He gestured at the orchard behind him. "They got it all wrong. The point isn't to fight for a seat. The point is to build more seats. The point is to build a bigger table, or a second one, or a third. The point is to see someone standing in the cold and open the damn door." He looked down, as if collecting his thoughts, and then back up, his gaze like steel. "The lawyers will have shown them a decoy will. That will is designed to be fought over. It's bait. It will keep them busy in court, fighting over scraps, revealing their natures, but the real one is this, the Orion Hearth Trust, and it has a single, non-negotiable activation clause. The heir, he said, his voice dropping, must be literally, physically, and verifiably excluded from the family's primary Thanksgiving gathering. They must be denied a seat. They must be sent away. Because that's the test. It's not a test of your intelligence. Summer, I already know you're smarter than all of them combined. It's a test of their character. A test I knew, with absolute certainty, they would fail. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering. He knew. He set a trap, and they walked right into it. You've met the condition. Summer, he said. The fact that you are in that vault means you were sent to the shed. You found the key. You connected with Ezekiel, and you opened the door. The exclusion was the trigger. You just fired the gun. The video ended, returning me to the folder. More files were now visible, unlocked by the video. One was a folder titled Harvest Seat Kitchen. I opened it. It was a complete, turnkey business plan. Architectural diagrams for converting an old grain warehouse, budget projections, staffing models, sourcing lists, permitting applications, already filled out. It was a community kitchen, a pay-what-you-can restaurant, and a food pantry, all in one. It was the second table, made literal. There was a scanned, handwritten note in the same folder, just a line on his letterhead. If they won't give you a seat at the table, I'm giving you the key to the whole house. Now go open it for everyone else. My hands were shaking. I had an inheritance. It wasn't just money, it was a job. I kept digging. I found another folder, this one labeled Legal. Inside was a copy of the decoy will, and attached to it, the legal filings I'd only heard about. There was Raymond's official petition, filed with Trent as a co-signer, and my mother, Nora, as a witness. It cited my prolonged and willful estrangement. It claimed I had a history of volatile and unrealistic behavior. It painted a picture of me as unstable, grasping, and a threat to the family's financial security. He was claiming I was an unfit heir. He was using my independence, the very independence he and his emotional abuse had forced on me, as a weapon to disinherit me. It was so cold. So, Raymond. This was the narrative they were fighting in court, a fight over a will that didn't even matter. But there was one more file in the main directory. It was labeled Keyhole Escrow. I opened it. It was a simple text file. It contained an account number for a local Cedar Ridge bank and a string of text. Keyhole Escrow account, primary disbursement, access code, your date, your mark. My date, my birthday, 8/2/5, my mark, the L from the key. I went to the bank's website. It was a small, local institution, the kind my grandfather would have trusted. I found the online portal for trust accounts. I typed in the account number. A login screen appeared. It asked for a two-factor authentication, a password, and a symbol. I typed in 825. In the second box, I typed a capital L. I hit enter. The screen loaded. My breath caught. It opened. It was a standard bank account summary. Account holder. Keyhole escrow. Account balance. $0, 0 cents. My stomach dropped. A cold, sick feeling. I scrolled down. Recent activity. One transaction. Dated 2 days ago. Full balance transfer. Wire out. Authorized. By Trent Locke. They had found it. While I was in the vault, digging into the past, they had been a step ahead. They had found the escrow account. They had drained it. Raymond's confession about the vault. It wasn't a confession. It was a distraction. He was frustrated by the vault, but he'd already found the money. He'd let me go. Let me play my little game. Because he thought he'd already won. He'd left a $0 balance for the unfit daughter to find. I felt like I was going to be sick, right there in the library. I leaned back, my head spinning. It was over. I had all this proof, this moral victory. But the money, the actual capital to do any of it, was gone, transferred by Trent. I stared at the 0 on the screen. I went back to the USB drive, to the video file. I had clicked end. I hadn't let it run. I clicked play again. My grandfather's face appeared. He smiled. The video played for 5 more seconds, showing him on the truck. Then it cut. The screen went black. And then a new clip started. It was Walter again, but he wasn't on the truck. He was in the vault. The camera was close on his face, his expression grim, almost mischievous. "Ah," he said, as if I had just spoken. "So you found the keyhole account, and if I know Raymond, and I'm betting my entire estate that I do, the account is empty." He smiled, a full, brilliant smile. "Good, that's plan B. You see, Summer, that account was a decoy. Just like the will. It was the surface account. I put just enough money in it to be tempting, enough to make them think they'd won the lottery. I left the security just strong enough to be a challenge, but weak enough for a determined, greedy man to break. I was counting on it." He leaned closer to the camera. Because the moment that wire transfer was initiated, the moment anyone not named Summer Hale Allison touched that account, it triggered a kill switch. That transfer didn't go to Trent's new account. It was automatically, instantaneously rerouted, along with the entire balance of the Hale agricultural shares, into the real trust. He tapped the screen, as if tapping my nose. The Orion Hearth Trust, a shadow trust, an account so deep, so legally ironclad, that it's invisible to everyone, until now. That trust, he continued, had only one condition for activation. It couldn't be accessed by you. It couldn't be accessed by me. It could only be unlocked by a 2-part physical act. The first part was the keyhole account being tampered with. The second part, he said, and his smile widened, was the proper, ceremonial opening of the orchard vault, the dual lock mechanism, the key you were given, and the combination you've known your whole life. By opening that vault last night, you, and only you, could have armed the final stage. The transfer is complete. The Orion Hearth Trust is now active, and it is entirely, irrevocably, 100% yours. Ezekiel is holding the final piece of paper, a power of attorney that I signed, giving you full access. He was instructed not to give it to you until you told him the password. The password, by the way, is second table. Go get it. Summer. They think they stole from you. They think they won. All they did was sign their own confession and light the fuse on your inheritance. Now, go build something. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of the library, the smell of old paper and my grandfather's genius hanging in the air. He hadn't just left me a key. He had left me a chessboard, already set to checkmate. I bought the food. I bought the wine. I set the table. 2 days had passed since the breakfast confrontation. I spent that time with Ezekiel and a burner phone, activating the trust, signing the power of attorney Ezekiel had held for me, and making 2 crucial appointments. I had called my mother that morning, my voice saturated with a carefully manufactured resignation. "I'm leaving tomorrow, Mom." I'd said, "But I don't want to leave like this. I don't want to leave angry. Can we just have one dinner? A real one? Just us. My treat. I'll bring everything." She had cried, a sound of such profound, watery relief. Raymond, I was sure, had interpreted my offer as a white flag, a final, pathetic attempt at reconciliation before I crawled back to my alley dinners. So they came. It was Friday night, 7 o'clock. We were in the formal dining room, the same room that had held my exclusion, but this time, I was at the head of the table. I had placed Raymond to my left and my mother to my right. Trent sat opposite me, already on his second glass of the expensive wine I'd brought. The arrogance was rolling off them in waves. They thought I was a joke. They thought they had won. They thought the $0 balance in the keyhole account was the end of the story. "Well, Summer," Raymond said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "We appreciate the gesture. It's nice to see you've come to your senses." "It's just, family is important," I said. my voice soft. I picked at the roasted chicken I had barely touched. I've been thinking a lot about family, about legacies. I set my fork down with a soft click. I looked at my mother, then at Raymond. Then, I deliberately turned my heavy china plate upside down. The scrape of porcelain on the tablecloth was loud in the suddenly quiet room. Trent snorted. "What, the chicken not good enough for you now?" My mother just looked confused, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Summer, honey, what is it?" "I was just looking at the plate," I said. I ran my finger over the smooth white bottom. "See? Nothing there." Raymond's eyes narrowed. He did not like this. He did not like theater he couldn't control. "But it reminded me of a story," I continued, my voice light, conversational, "about a very, very wise man. This man had a family he loved, but he saw them, he knew them, and he worried that they had forgotten what the point of the table was. So he set a test, a secret test." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "He left a key, a very important key. He didn't give it to the son who made the most noise. He didn't give it to the wife who looked the other way. He hid it. He put it somewhere only the excluded one would find it." I looked directly at Raymond. "He hid it," I whispered, "under the plate of the person they sent away." My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small, horrified gasp. Trent just looked baffled. "What the hell are you talking about? Keys? Plates? Are you drunk?" But Raymond did not move. He did not speak. His face, a moment before so smug and controlled, was slowly, deeply, turning a dark, mottled red. His knuckles were white where he gripped his wineglass. He knew. More of your stories. Summer?" Raymond finally spat out, the words tight. "More of your alley dinner theater?" "You're right, Raymond," I said, giving him a bright, empty smile. "Theater is so abstract. I've always preferred mechanics. Things you can see." I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. 7:29, I said, as if to myself. I picked up the remote control from the sideboard. Right on time. I turned on the large television mounted in the corner. I changed the channel to the local news. "And in our Cedar Ridge comeback segment," the news anchor was saying, "a new project is breathing life into one of the town's oldest buildings. We go live to Brenda Pates at the old Mill Street grain warehouse." The screen cut to a reporter standing in front of a massive, familiar-looking brick building. A huge banner was draped over the entrance, professionally printed with a logo. The hail crest, the wheat and the wheel, and underneath, the words, "The Harvest Seat Kitchen." Trent shot up from his chair. "What is that? What the hell is that?" On the screen, the reporter was interviewing a local contractor. "It's the most amazing project I've ever seen. Brenda," the man was saying, "state-of-the-art kitchen, community dining, even a makerspace for job training, all funded by a new, anonymous trust. They said this thing is fully endowed. This is here for good." I turned the volume down but left the image on the screen. The logo. My grandfather's logo. "I have a proposition. Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm. I didn't look at Raymond or Trent. I looked at Nora. "The Harvest Seat Kitchen opens in 3 weeks. It's a community project. It needs a board. I'm offering you the first seat." My mother just stared at me, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Summer, I don't—" "You're insane!" Trent roared, his face purple. He was pointing at the screen, then at me. That's millions. That's our money. Where did you get the money? You stole it. You stole our money." "I didn't steal anything, Trent," I said, smiling. "I have a donor, a very, very generous and very anonymous donor." "This is a fraud!" Raymond's fist came crashing down on the dining table. The crystal glasses jumped, the silverware rattled. He was on his feet, his chair scraping back. He was no longer red. He was white with rage. "You are a thief. You come into my house. You slander us with your sick little stories. You try to steal Walter's legacy with this. This circus. He gestured wildly at the television. I'll have you in court by Monday morning. I'll sue you for theft, for fraud, for slander. You will not see 1 cent. I will see you in prison. He was panting, his chest heaving. The room was silent. Even Trent was quiet, shocked by the force of his father's rage. I waited. I let the silence stretch, let his threats hang in the air, thick and poisonous. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. You can't, I said. His head snapped toward me. What did you say? You can't sue me. Raymond, I said, setting the glass down. Because to do that, you would have to explain to a judge exactly what you were doing when you and Trent used a fraudulent authorization to illegally access the Keyhole escrow account 2 days ago. The color drained from his face. You would have to explain, I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel, how you triggered the very audit clause my grandfather put in place to protect his estate from you. Raymond stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. The sound was loud, clear, and perfectly timed. My mother jumped. Trent looked wildly at the door. Raymond was frozen. Don't worry, I said, standing up. I'm expecting them. I walked to the front door. On the porch stood 2 people. One was Mr. Sullivan, my grandfather's lawyer, looking severe and correct in a dark suit, holding a briefcase. The other was a sharp professional woman in a crisp blouse. Summer, Mr. Sullivan said, his nod curt. This is Ms. Hayes. She's a forensic auditor with the Orion Trust. Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming, I said. They're in the dining room. I led them in. The scene in the dining room was a tableau of guilt. Raymond was still standing, his face a mask of disbelief. Trent had collapsed into his chair, pale and sweating. What is the meaning of this? Raymond finally blustered, trying to regain his composure. Sullivan, you're trespassing. I'm afraid not. Raymond, Mr. Sullivan said, his voice like dry ice. He opened his briefcase on the sideboard. I am here as the legal executor of the Orion Hearth Trust, activated by Ms. Allison 48 hours ago. Ms. Hayes is here to serve notice. Serve notice? My mother whispered. Ms. Hayes stepped forward, placing a thick stack of papers on the table. This is a legal notice of asset freeze, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. 2 days ago, an unauthorized wire transfer was initiated from the Keyhole escrow account. The transfer was initiated from an IP address registered to this home, by a device registered to a Trent Locke, using a power of attorney authorization belonging to a Raymond Locke. Trent made a small, choking sound. The money, it never arrived. It disappeared. It did not disappear. Mr. Locke, Sullivan said, his voice sharp. It was automatically rerouted, as per the explicit, non-negotiable terms of the second table codicil, which you triggered with your attempted theft. Your unauthorized withdrawal was the final key. It transferred the entire Hale agricultural holding, every share, every deed, into the Orion Hearth Trust, under the sole, direct control of Ms. Summer Allison. Trent looked like he was going to be physically sick. Raymond, however, drew himself up. He had one last card to play, the one he always played. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his voice suddenly dropping, becoming oily, reasonable. We are a family. We can sort this out. This is a private family matter. Summer, you don't want to do this. We can make a deal. We are a family, he boomed, his eyes suddenly wild. You can't just throw us out. We are family. Mr. Sullivan just looked at him, his face a mask of pure, cold contempt. Mr. Hale anticipated this argument, Sullivan said. He pulled a small tablet from his briefcase. He left a final clarifying message for this specific contingency. He pressed play. My grandfather's face, clear and sharp, filled the screen. He was in his vault. He was looking right at us. "Raymond," he said, his voice filling the silent room. "If you are hearing this, it means you have just tried to use the word family as a shield. After you tried to steal from my granddaughter, let me be clear." Walter leaned into the camera, his eyes burning. "Family," he said, his voice a low, powerful growl, "is about pulling up more chairs, Raymond, not about putting a boot on someone else's neck to steal theirs." The video went black. Sullivan closed the tablet. "As of 7:35 p.m. this evening," he said, "all assets tied to the Hale Agricultural Trust, and all accounts held by you, Mr. Locke, and you, Mr. Trent Locke, that were commingled with that trust, are frozen, pending a full forensic audit and the execution of the second table codicil." He looked at Raymond. "You, sir, have just funded the Harvest Seat Kitchen with your entire portfolio. You will be hearing from my office on Monday." Sullivan and Ms. Hayes turned and walked out. I stood by the sideboard. Raymond and Trent were still frozen. My mother was sobbing, her head in her hands. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I let the law, the perfect, beautiful, cold mechanics of my grandfather's trap, do the talking. I didn't go back to Raymond's house. There was no reason to. The silence I left behind was a far more potent weapon than any word I could have said. My work wasn't there. My work was on Mill Street. The day after the dinner, a Monday, I signed the lease on the old grain warehouse. It wasn't a lease, really. The Orion Hearth Trust acquired the building, a transaction that took Mr. Sullivan less than an hour. The local paper, which had been tracking Raymond's impending foreclosure, ran a small, confused story about a mysterious last-minute purchase. The building was magnificent. 3 stories of old-growth timber beams, brick walls a foot thick, and a vast, open-ground floor that smelled of burlap, dust, and a century of stored grain. It was cold, cavernous, and perfect. The Harvest Seat Kitchen was no longer a plan in a folder. It was a blueprint I was executing in real time. The first thing I did was put on my work boots. The second was to call the contractors. While the main kitchen was being plumbed and wired to commercial specifications, I focused on the other half of my grandfather's design, the makerspace. This was my territory. This was the part he had left for me, the engineer. It was a 2,000-square-foot annex that had once been the loading bay. It was a concrete box full of shadows and grease stains. I looked at the space, at the strong steel rafters and the solid floor, and I saw my real inheritance. I started making calls, not to donors, to volunteers. My first call was to the retired head of the local mechanics union. My second was to the nursing administrator at the county hospital. My third was to the shop teacher at the high school. Within 48 hours, my volunteer force assembled. It wasn't the who's who of Cedar Ridge charity. It was better. It was the who does. It was retired machinists who arrived with their own perfectly maintained tool chests. It was nurses who knew more about food safety and community health than any 5-star chef. It was high school kids from the robotics club, desperate for a challenge bigger than a styrofoam volcano. We worked from dawn until long after the sun set. We didn't talk about Raymond. We didn't talk about the scandal. We talked about load-bearing walls, HVAC efficiency, and the best way to clean a century of grime off a brick facade. The kitchen was designed with a single, practical purpose: to serve the people the town forgot. Our primary hours weren't 9 to 5. We focused on the night shift, the third shift nurses, the factory workers, the overnight stockers at the grocery store, the truck drivers, the people who, like me, often ate alone in the cold. We established protocols that were rigorous. Nora, my mother, showed up on the 4th day. She didn't call. She didn't ask for permission. She just appeared at the warehouse door, still in her sensible work clothes from the dentist's office where she worked as a receptionist. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The place was a chaotic symphony of angle grinders, hammers, and shouted instructions. I was on a scissor lift, wiring a junction box near the ceiling. I saw her, powered the lift down, and landed in front of her, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. We just looked at each other. She was terrified. Terrified of Raymond's reaction. Terrified of this new, loud world. Terrified of me. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice trembling. Good, I said. Then you're here to learn. Put your purse in the office. Find the head nurse. Barb, she's in charge of the dry storage inventory. She needs someone who can run a label maker and has neat handwriting. Go. She didn't move. Mom, I said, my voice softer, but firm. This is a new table. There's a seat for you, if you want it. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. Then, for the first time in my 30 years of life, she did something for herself. She took a deep breath, nodded, and walked past me into the chaos, without looking back to see if Raymond was watching. My biggest engineering challenge was the heating. The warehouse was massive and old. The quotes for a traditional gas furnace were astronomical and inefficient. So I built my own. In a back corner of the makerspace, I assembled the prototype I'd designed in my head for years. It was a modular, renewable energy thermal unit. It used a closed-loop geothermal exchange combined with a passive solar gain system I'd reverse-engineered from an old agricultural tech journal. The retired mechanics watched me, fascinated. At first, they were skeptical. Then, they started handing me wrenches. Within a week, we had a working, custom-built heating system that would keep the entire building at a perfect 70 degrees, using less energy than a single-family home. The local news reporter, Brenda Pates, came back. This time, she wasn't just at the door, she was inside. Her segment ran on the 6 o'clock news. The camera panned over the gleaming, new, stainless steel kitchen. It showed the high school students learning to weld in the makerspace. It showed my mother, her hair in a net, proudly explaining the FIFO inventory system. The segment was titled, A New Table in an Old Town. Ezekiel, who had quietly become the building's superintendent, found me that evening. We were sitting on the new loading dock, the first snow of the season starting to fall. He used to do that, you know, Ezekiel said quietly, nodding toward the kitchen. Mr. Walter, every Friday, he'd have his bakers make an extra 24 apple tarts. He'd sit on the steps of the main house, and any worker, from the fields or the trucks, who came by, he'd hand them a tart, no questions, no thank you needed. He looked at me, his eyes clear. He didn't do it to be thanked. He did it because he hated the idea of anyone leaving his property hungry. The next day, I took a piece of reclaimed oak from the warehouse build-out, ran it through the new planer in the makerspace, and spent 2 hours with the new wood router. I hung the sign on the front door myself. It was simple, the letters deep and clear. If they don't invite you in, we pull a chair out on the porch. The donations started to come in, not from me, from the town. A local plumbing supplier, anonymously, donated all the fixtures for the public restrooms. The trucking company Walter had once owned shares in sent a check for $10,000, earmarked for night shift meals. The anonymous donor who purchased the kitchen's main piece of equipment, a $30,000 combination oven, was, of course, me, the first official disbursement from the Orion Hearth Trust. My old life tried to find me. An email appeared in my inbox. It was a formal invitation from the Briarfield Institute of Technology, a prestigious, private engineering college. They had seen the news segment on my heating module. They wanted me to be a guest speaker. Women in STEM. The future of green tech. I read the email, looked at the $500 honorarium they were offering, and hit delete. I put my coat on and drove to the county's Family Services Center. I found the director of the homeless shelter and the long-term unemployment office. I'm Summer Allison, I said. I'm opening a makerspace. I need apprentices. I don't care about their resumes. I care about whether they're willing to learn how to fix an engine at 7 a.m. I'm prioritizing your lists, the long-term unemployed, the hard to place, The ones who haven't been given a seat. I'm starting my first class on Monday. The new table was open. It was loud. It was busy. And it was warm. It was real. But I knew the final battle wasn't here. This was the fortress. This was the future. The war itself, the final, quiet signature on the old world, was still waiting for me back at the manor. The attack came on Tuesday. I was 40 feet up on a scissor lift, mapping the conduit runs for the Makerspace's new server array. When my burner phone vibrated, it was Sullivan. He never wasted time with hello. He's filed. Sullivan's voice was a flat, efficient blade. Emergency motion. He's petitioning the court for a temporary restraining order. He wants to freeze all operations at the Harvest Seat Kitchen. He wants to bar you from Hale Manor. And he is demanding the court order you to surrender the stolen family property, namely, the orchard key. He's desperate, I said, the sound of my own voice small in the cavernous warehouse. He's fast, Sullivan corrected, and he's claiming you exerted undue influence on a confused, dying man. He's painting you as a transient grifter. The hearing is tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Be there. And Summer, wear a suit. The next morning, the courtroom felt like a cold, pressurized tank. Raymond was already there, at the plaintiff's table. He was the image of pained, respectable grief, dressed in a somber navy suit, his face a mask of a patriarch forced into an ugly duty. His lawyer was polished, sharp, and expensive. He argued for 20 minutes, painting a picture of a volatile, estranged daughter who had appeared from nowhere to seize control of an estate that was not hers. He used all of Raymond's words: unrealistic, disruptive, unstable. The judge, a woman with intelligent, tired eyes, finally looked at Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, your response to this rather colorful narrative? Sullivan stood. He was not dramatic. He carried a single, thin, leather-bound folder. Your Honor, he said, Mr. Locke's petition is creative. It's also based on a complete fiction. The estate he claims to be protecting was, in fact, legally and irrevocably transferred to the Orion Hearth Trust before Mr. Locke's client even knew it was missing. He presented the executed trust documents. He presented the power of attorney. The activation of this trust, Sullivan continued, his voice perfectly level, was contingent on a very specific codicil, a test, if you will, which Mr. Hale put in place. Ironically, the final stage of that test was activated by Mr. Locke himself, when he and his son illegally attempted to wire funds from the Keyhole escrow account. The judge's eyebrows disappeared into her hairline. Are you telling me, Mr. Sullivan, that the plaintiff triggered his own disinheritance? Precisely, Your Honor. He was the final key. My client, Ms. Allison, was merely the beneficiary of a test Mr. Hale set, a test Mr. Locke and Mr. Trent Locke failed in spectacular fashion. We are asking for a summary dismissal, with prejudice. The judge read the codicil. She read the wire transfer attempt. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. She looked up, her gaze flat and cold, and aimed it directly at Raymond. Mr. Locke, she said, this is, without a doubt, the most audacious attempt at fraud, disguised as familial duty, that I have seen in my court this year. Your motion is dismissed. With prejudice, if I see your name on my docket again in relation to this estate, I will not be this generous. We are done here. Raymond sat, frozen, his face the color of ash, as the judge swept from the room. I walked out into the hallway, the sound of my own heels clicking on the marble, and I did not look back. The legal slap was public. The asset freeze was absolute. For Trent, who I learned was leveraged to his eyes on the condo project, this was an extinction-level event. He panicked, cut off from the Keyhole account, his own funds frozen by the audit. He did something phenomenally stupid. He went to a private, high-interest mortgage broker from out of state. He tried to take out a $5 million emergency loan. As collateral, he offered the deed to the Hale orchard. The broker, smelling a massive payday, ran the title check. The transaction was flagged in less than 4 minutes. The title wasn't just in dispute, it was listed as the sole, unencumbered property of the Orion Hearth Trust. The fraud alert that popped up on the broker's screen was so severe, so absolute, that it likely triggered automatic notifications to 3 federal agencies. Trent had just, in a single desperate afternoon, committed felony bank fraud. The news of the attempted sale, and its spectacular failure, leaked. This wasn't quiet gossip. This was a sonic boom. Raymond's boy tried to sell the orchard. In Cedar Ridge, this was not a financial story. This was a threat. The Hale Orchard was not just land. It was the largest single employer in the county. The farm, the co-op, the distribution center. The rumor, fed by panic, evolved. Raymond and Trent are selling the orchard to out-of-state developers. Fear for their jobs did what my legal battle could not. It galvanized the town. The symbiotic development Raymond had spun was now seen as a lie to cover a strip mine operation. The public, which had been confused, now had a clear villain. And I, by default, became the protector. The Harvest Seat Kitchen wasn't just a charity, it was a symbol that the new owner was investing, not divesting. All this pressure, the legal, the financial, the public, landed squarely on the one person who was still, technically, on the fence, my mother. I hadn't seen her since the night of the confrontation. She hadn't come to the warehouse. I assumed she had retreated, as always, into the silent, frozen shell of Raymond's control. I was wrong. Brenda Pates, the news reporter, found my mother at the dental office where she worked. She had been sent to get a comment from the wronged wife of the town's new pariah. The camera was on Nora. She looked small, pale, her blue receptionist's scrubs looking thin under the fluorescent lights. Her hands were twisting, the old, familiar gesture of a woman wringing her own nerves. "Mrs. Locke," Brenda said, the microphone extended. "Your husband and son are facing serious accusations. The town is worried about the orchard. Do you have any comment on their plans to sell?" Nora looked at the camera. I could see her, in my mind, looking for Raymond, looking for an exit. She took a breath, and she stopped twisting her hands. "My name is Nora Hale," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. It was the first time in 3 decades I had heard her claim her own name. "There will be no sale. My husband's plans are not my plans." The reporter was stunned. "So you're not supporting your husband?" Nora looked directly into the lens, directly at me. I was at a table, for a very long time. It was a cold, small table. But my daughter, Summer, she is building a new table, a bigger one, a warmer one. She took a small step forward. "I choose the table my daughter is building. That is my only comment." She walked past the camera, out of the building. The news segment aired at 5 p.m. Ezekiel, who had heard, told me what happened next. Raymond, sitting alone in the dark, silent house, watched it. He watched his wife, in her own quiet, devastating way, disavow him. He didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He packed a single, expensive, leather duffel bag. He walked out of the house, got into his car, and drove away. The house, the one I'd been banished from, the one he'd ruled like a petty tyrant, was now empty. Just my mother, sitting in the silent kitchen, the silence no longer Raymond's, but her own. She called me an hour later. "He's gone," was all she said. "I'm coming over," I replied. I found her at the kitchen table, the one where Raymond had held court. She was drinking a cup of tea. The house felt hollowed out. "He left," she said, not looking at me. I didn't mean for him to leave." "Yes, you did," I said, sitting across from her. "You meant to be free." She cried then, a quiet, exhausted cry that lasted for a long time. When she was finished, I pulled the heavy silver orchard key from my pocket. I slid it across the table. It came to a stop in front of her. Her eyes widened. She looked at the key, the object that had started all of this. "Hold it," I said. "Oh, no, Summer, I couldn't." "Hold it, Mom." Her hand, the one that had twisted 1,000 dishcloths, closed around the heavy, cold steel. "Walter. He never trusted me," she whispered, her voice thick with an ancient pain. "He never trusted me after I chose Raymond." "He didn't trust Raymond," I corrected gently. "He trusted you to see the truth, eventually." She held the key, her knuckles white, for a full minute, a ritual. Then, she slid it back across the table to me. "It's yours," she said, her voice clear. "It was always meant for you." As my hand closed around it, the back door opened. Ezekiel walked in, without knocking. He had never, in his entire life, set foot in this kitchen. "Mrs. Hale," he nodded to my mother, his voice respectful. "Ms. Summer, now that the house is clean, it is time for the final piece." He was holding a dusty, velvet-wrapped object. He placed it on the table. He unwrapped it. It was a single, heavy, porcelain dinner plate, the old Hale china, the one with the wheat and the wheel crest. "Your grandfather was a man of rituals, Ms. Summer," Ezekiel said. "He showed you the vault. He did not show you the keyhole." "The keyhole?" I said, remembering the escrow account. "The vault was for the will. The keyhole is for the legacy. He showed you the key under the plate, but he didn't show you the next step." He took the silver key from my hand. He placed the plate, face up, on the center of the kitchen table. Then, he placed the key on top of the plate, directly over the crest. "This wasn't just a metaphor," Ezekiel said. "It's a mechanism." He motioned for me to follow. "We must go to the manor, now." My mother came with us. We didn't go to the vault. We went to the main library in the orchard wing, a vast, 2-story room I hadn't been in since I was a child. In the center was a single, massive, dark oak table, the orchard table. "He built this table himself," Ezekiel said, running his hand over the wood. "He loved his little puzzles." He pointed to the center of the table. There was a faint, circular outline in the wood, the exact size of the plate. Ezekiel placed the porcelain plate on the table. In the inlay, it fit perfectly. "Now," he said to me, "the key." My hand was steady. I placed the heavy silver key on the plate, over the crest. For a second, nothing. Then, a soft, mechanical click. A section of the tabletop, about a foot square, under the plate, sank an inch and then slid silently aside. It revealed a shallow, velvet-lined compartment. A safe, the keyhole safe. My mother gasped. Inside was not gold. It was not cash. It was a single, simple, leather-bound book, a ledger. On the cover, in gold leaf, were 3 words: "The second table, guests." I opened it. The first page was my grandfather's handwriting. "A seat is a promise," it read. "This house is a promise. Fill it." The rest of the pages were blank. I understood. The vault held the will. This held the work. I closed the book. I looked at Ezekiel. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were shining, not with tears, but with light. "The Harvest Seat kitchen is open," I said. "But Hale Manor, this is the main table." I made the decision. "Ezekiel," I said, "we're hosting a dinner, this Saturday night, here." "Who?" he asked, a small smile touching his lips. "Are we inviting?" "Everyone," I said. "The volunteers from the makerspace, the mechanics, the nurses, the night shift, the people from the shelter I've been interviewing, everyone who built the second table." "A public dinner?" my mother asked, her voice nervous, but alive. "A public dinner," I confirmed. "The first official dinner of the Orion Hearth Trust." I pulled out my phone. I opened a new email. I addressed it to the last known, now frozen accounts of Raymond Locke and Trent Locke. I knew the court monitors would ensure they received it. The subject line was simple: an invitation. The body of the email was even simpler: A seat has been saved for you at Hale Manor, this Saturday, 7 p.m. Come if you want. I hit send. The news hit the town by morning. Not a lawsuit, not a foreclosure, a party. The entire town was buzzing. The final battle wasn't going to be in a courtroom. It was going to be over dinner. The great hall at Hale Manor was unrecognizable. When Raymond had lived here, the room had been a museum of dark wood and heavy, silent furniture. It had been cold. Tonight, it was blazing with warmth. A massive fire roared in the hearth at the far end, illuminating the stone walls and the high timbered ceiling. Down the precise center of the room, one single, massive table had been set. It was the orchard table, the one from the library, moved here for this night. It was made of ancient, polished oak, and it seated 50. There was no head of the table. There was no seat of power. The chairs were arranged, equally, down both sides. Ezekiel, in a crisp black suit, had overseen the setting. Each place was set with the heavy, priceless Hale china, the plates with the wheat and the wheel crest. And every single plate was turned upside down. It was a statement of mystery, a puzzle. The guests, as they arrived, would have to wonder. Under one plate, and only one, was the faint, circular brass inlay of the keyhole. I stood by the fire, my back to the warmth, and waited. I was not the daughter from the shed. I was not the engineer from the warehouse. Tonight, I was the host. At 6:45, they began to arrive. These were not the people who normally saw the inside of Hale Manor. These were the people who kept the town running. My rule was simple, and Ezekiel enforced it at the door. First come, first served, find a seat you like, all are equal. The first to arrive were the machinists, the retired mechanics from the makerspace. They walked in, wiping their boots on the mat. Looking up at the ceiling beams with professional appreciation, they carried themselves with a quiet dignity, their hands clean, but their knuckles permanently stained with the grease of a life's work. They found seats near the middle, together, talking quietly. Then came the nurses, the night shift. They arrived in a group, laughing. Their faces tired but alive. They had come straight from the hospital, some still in their scrubs. They were the ones who knew, better than anyone, what a second table meant. They were the ones who lived on bad coffee and stolen moments. Then came the loggers from the co-op, the high school kids from the robotics club, the line cooks I had just hired for the Harvest Seat kitchen. They were my apprentices from the shelter, the ones who had been told they were hard to place, now looking sharp and nervous and proud. The hall filled. The noise level rose. It wasn't the polite, strained chatter of Raymond's parties. It was loud. It was laughter. It was the sound of a community that had not had a place to gather in a very long time. And through it all, my mother moved. She was not Nora Locke, the pale, nervous wife. She was Nora Hale, and she was in her element. She wore a simple black dress, but over it, she wore a clean white apron. She was not a guest. She was, like me, a host. She moved through the tables, a silver tray in her hands, offering hot apple tarts, the ones from Ezekiel's story, made from the last of the orchard's fall harvest. She smiled, and it was not the weak, wavering smile I had known. This smile was light, yes, but it was also an anchor. She had found her footing. She was home. At 7:15, the great oak doors opened one last time. The laughter in the hall did not die. It froze. Raymond and Trent stood in the doorway. They were late. They were, for the first time in their lives, the last to arrive. They were dressed, not for a party, but for a hearing. They wore their best, darkest, most severe suits. They looked like undertakers at a wedding. Their expressions were a twisted, complex mask of wounded pride and raw, undeniable curiosity. They had been invited. They had no power here, but they could not, would not, be left out of the final reading of the will. They had come to see what was left for them to claim. They stood, awkward, exposed, as the entire room of workers and nurses and mechanics turned, in unison, to stare at them. I walked from the fireplace, through the center of the tables. "Raymond, Trent, good of you to come," I said. My voice was clear, carrying in the sudden silence. "As you can see, the table is almost full, but we saved you a seat." I gestured to 2 empty chairs at the very end of the table, nearest the door, the lowest position, the place furthest from the fire. They walked. Every eye in the room followed them. They sat. I returned to the center of the table. I stood next to the plate with the brass inlay. I could feel the heat of the fire on my back, and the cold, assessing stares of my stepfather and half-brother in front of me. "Welcome," I said, my voice projecting, calm and strong. "Welcome, all of you, to Hale Manor. Welcome to the first dinner of the second table." I looked at the faces, the nurses, the mechanics, my mother, who stood near the wall, her tray of tarts held like a shield, her eyes shining. "My grandfather, Walter Hale, built this place," I said. "But he didn't build it to be a museum. He built it as a home, and he believed that a home, that a family, had rules. I'm not talking about rules of etiquette. I'm talking about the mechanics of a community." I put my hand on the upside-down plate in front of me. Walter had 2 rules for his second table. The first rule was simple. If you see someone standing, you add a seat. You don't hoard your chairs. You don't build a smaller table. You build a new one. I saw the nurses nod. I saw the shelter apprentices looking at their hands, understanding. "The second rule," I continued, "was even more simple. All seats are equal. There is no head of the table. The person who built the chair is just as important as the person who sits in it. The person who serves the food is just as important as the person who eats it." I looked at my mother, and she smiled, a real, brilliant smile. He believed in these rules so much. He built his entire legacy around them. He built a test, a way to find out who understood. I turned the heavy china plate over, revealing the polished wood, the brass inlay, and the small, dark keyhole in the center. A collective gasp went up from the room. "He hid his legacy," I said, "not in a bank, but in a table, and he built a lock that only one person could open." I pulled the heavy, antique silver key from my pocket, the one from the shed. I looked at Raymond. His face was a death mask. He was not breathing. I placed the key on the brass inlay. I pressed it. I turned it. The silence in the hall was so complete, I could hear the snow melting on the windows. There was a single, sharp, heavy, mechanical click. The sound was not loud, but it was final. A square of the thick oak table, the keyhole safe, sank, then slid silently open. The entire table, all 50 guests, leaned in. Inside, on the velvet, was not treasure. It was a stack of original, hand-signed land deeds. It was Walter's personal fountain pen, and it was one, final, sealed envelope. But before I could touch it, the lights in the hall dimmed. "Ezekiel," I said. "Ready, Ms. Summer?" His voice came from the back. A projector I had hidden in the rafters whirred to life. A bright white square illuminated the vast stone wall above the fireplace. And then, my grandfather's face appeared. He was in the vault. He was wearing his work clothes. He was looking at us. He was looking at me. "Hello, Summer?" His voice boomed, rich and warm, filling the hall. "If you are watching this, if you are all watching this, it means my little mechanic did it. It means she was tested. It means she was cast out. It means she probably had to sleep in a damned cold shed, but she still got up the next morning and found a way to open the kitchen." A few of the mechanics laughed, a short, sharp sound of respect. My mother was crying, but this time, her hand was not at her mouth, it was at her heart. Walter's face on the screen turned grim. "I set up this trust for one reason. You cannot give power to people who only want to sell seats. You can only give power to people who want to build them." "So, here are the terms," he said, his voice becoming the formal, legal declaration it was. "As of the activation of this codicil, which Ms. Allison's exclusion and Mr. Locke's attempted theft so perfectly triggered, the following is law. Raymond sank lower in his chair, as if the words were a physical weight. On Hale Manor, the orchard lands, and all controlling shares of the Hale Agricultural Trust are to be transferred, immediately and irrevocably, into the Orion Hearth Trust, under the sole executorship of my granddaughter, Summer Hale Allison. The room was silent. 2, Walter continued. That is not a gift. It is a contract. The Orion Hearth Trust and its executor are bound by one non-negotiable condition. Not 1 acre of the orchard land is ever to be sold. It is to be held for the community. It can be leased, for the good of the town, for farming, for industry, for new tables. But it will never be sold to developers. It is not capital. It is home. The loggers from the co-op looked at each other, and a slow, spreading smile of profound relief broke out among them. Their jobs were safe. 3. A lifetime discretionary stipend is to be provided to my daughter, Nora Hale, not as an allowance, as a salary, for services rendered, for her patience, and for the life I should have protected. My mother's sob was a sound of release, a 30-year-old anchor finally cut. 4. An apprenticeship fund, to be named Walter's Bench, is to be established, in perpetuity, for the young people of this town, to be administered by the new makerspace. The high school kids looked at each other, their eyes wide with possibility. And 5, Walter said, and his eyes seemed to find Raymond in the crowd. For anyone else, for anyone who tried to sell a seat, who tried to hoard the chairs, who locked the door, for them, there is nothing, no cash, no buyout, no seat at this table, unless they are invited by the new host. The video image held on Walter's face, his expression stern, loving, and final. The projector shut off. The lights came up. I stood at the head of the silent, awestruck room. I looked at the pen, the deeds, and the final envelope in the open safe. I looked at Raymond and Trent. They were ghosts. They were pale, translucent, their power utterly and completely gone. I picked up the final, sealed envelope. It was not addressed to me. It was addressed to the town. I didn't open it. I turned, instead, to the room. The meal, I said, my voice clear and steady, can continue. I looked at the 2 empty chairs, the ones I had reserved for the people from the shelter who hadn't been able to come. We have 2 empty seats. Who needs a chair? If you do not have a seat, we do not turn you away. We add one. The silence in the hall, the one that followed the end of Walter's video, was a vacuum. It was the sound of a world ending, and a new one waiting to be born. Into this vacuum, Raymond, predictably, tried to pour his old evaporated power. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly, violently, against the floor. His face was a terrible, pale mask, his eyes burning with the rage of a king who had just been told his throne was a 3-legged stool. This is a farce, he hissed, his voice hoarse, but still trying to project that old, familiar command. This is not a will. This is theater. This is theft. I am the patriarch of this family. I have rights. He stopped. He had no rights. The room was not his. The people were not his. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You have a seat, Raymond, I said, my voice cutting through his, not with volume, but with clarity. Just like everyone else. I gestured, not to the door, but to the man sitting next to his empty chair. It was Mr. Henderson, a machinist I'd met at the makerspace, a man who had worked at the Hale Co-op for 30 years. In fact, I said, I saved you this specific seat. You know Mr. Henderson, don't you? He told me you personally rejected his application for a foreman promotion 3 times. You said he wasn't management material. Tonight, he's here as my lead advisor on the makerspace. Please, sit. Raymond looked at Mr. Henderson. He looked at the chair. He looked at me. He was trapped between his pride and his powerlessness. Mr. Henderson, a man with a quiet, solid dignity that Raymond had never possessed, looked at Raymond. He didn't show anger, He didn't show triumph. He just showed a simple, plain decency. "There's a seat here, Mr. Locke," Henderson said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the still room. "I've got a seat tonight, and you do, too, if you want it." It was a simple offer, an offer of equality, and to a man like Raymond, equality felt like a profound, suffocating demotion. But the final, pathetic collapse came not from Raymond, but from Trent. His face, which had been pale, was now crumpled. He was the golden boy whose projects had just been declared worthless. He wasn't a patriarch. He was just a failed developer. He slumped forward, his head in his hands, and a choked, ugly sound came from him. It was a sob. I just, he said, his voice thick, muffled by his hands. "I just needed the money, the condo project. It was all I had. I just needed to save the project." He looked up, his eyes red, desperate, and scanned the room for an ally. He found none. He was just a boy who had been told he was a king, and now the kingdom was gone. I walked over to him. I did not offer him a hug. I did not offer him sympathy. I offered him what my grandfather had offered me: work. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. I unfolded it and placed it on the table in front of his plate. It was an application. What is this?" he choked out. "It's an application," I said, "for a paid internship at the Makerspace, Walter's Bench Fund. You'll report to Mr. Henderson. Hours are 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. You'll be sweeping floors, learning to change the oil on a 2-stroke engine, and running a drill press. You'll be paid $15 an hour, same as the high school kids." He stared at it, uncomprehending. An internship?" "You said you wanted to save your project," I said, looking him in the eye. "You don't know how to build a thing. Trent, you only know how to sell. If you want a future, you need to prove you can do it with your sleeves. Not just your invoices. The choice is yours. The seat is open." And then, another voice, quiet, but stronger than I had ever heard it. "And this time, I'll be watching." It was my mother. She was standing at the edge of the table, her hands no longer twisting, her face no longer pale. She was looking at me, but she was speaking to the entire room, to all of Cedar Ridge. I want to apologize," she said, her voice trembling, but gaining strength. Not for what they did, but for what I didn't do. I was a silent partner. I was quiet, because I was afraid. I was afraid of losing my seat." She looked directly at me, her eyes clear, bright, and full of a terrible, beautiful regret. "I am so sorry. Summer, I let them put you in the shed. I let them do it. I will never be quiet again." She took a deep breath. "This time, I will speak up." I didn't move. I just nodded. It was a start. It was the only start that mattered. The room was silent. The performance was over. The declarations were made. Now the work began. I walked back to the center of the table. I picked up my grandfather's fountain pen from the open keyhole safe, the one he had signed his life's work with. I took the final, sealed envelope, the one addressed to the town, and laid it flat. I took the stack of deeds for the orchard land. "I, Summerhale Allison," I said, my voice formal, "a new, public declaration. As executor of the Orion Hearth Trust, do hereby sign this public pledge. The Hale Manor is, from this day forward, the second table house, a place of community, open to all." I signed the envelope. "And I pledge," I continued, "that the orchard lands will never be sold. They will be held, in trust, for the people of this town, in perpetuity." I took the pen, and with a firm, steady hand, I signed the first deed, and the next, a public, binding, legal act. I put the pen down. "This is now law," I said. I looked at the people who had helped me. "But a house this big needs a staff. Ezekiel, you have managed the land your entire life. I am asking you to continue. You are the sole curator of the orchard and the Walters Bench Fund." Ezekiel, who had never once betrayed an emotion, looked at me, and his eyes were bright. He simply nodded. "As you wish, Ms. Summer." "Mom," I said, turning to her, "you said you wanted to speak up. The Harvest Seat Kitchen needs an operator. It needs someone to manage the staff, the budget, the heart. The seat is yours, if you want it." She didn't hesitate. "I accept," she said. And then, Raymond. He had been standing this entire time, a statue of rage. Now, he turned. He made his choice. He began to walk toward the great oak doors. The room watched. No one spoke. No one stopped him. The doors were open. The choice was his. He was almost at the threshold when he stopped. From the back of the hall, from the kitchens, a new sound was starting. The staff I had hired from the Harvest Seat, who were helping tonight, had started the cleanup, and they were laughing, a deep, warm, genuine laugh, the sound of a job well done, of a shared meal. It was the sound of a home. Raymond stood, silhouetted in the doorway, listening to a warmth he had never known how to create and could never, now, be a part of. I walked past him. I walked to the great, arched doorway. On the oak frame, there was an old wrought iron nail, one that had probably been there for 100 years, holding a long-gone decoration. I took the heavy, antique silver key, the key from the shed, the key from the vault, the key from the table, and I hung it on the nail. It hung there, in the light, for all to see. "From now on," I said, my voice quiet, but echoing in the hall, "the key is on the outside. Anyone who needs a seat, anyone who is cold, anyone who needs it, can take it." Raymond looked at the key. He looked at me. His gaze faltered. He understood. The power was no longer in the lock. It was no longer in the vault. It was no longer in the exclusion. The power was in the invitation. It was in the act of sitting as an equal. And he was not ready. He would never be ready. He turned, and without a word, he walked out of Hale Manor, into the cold, dark, and silent night. He left, alone. A movement at the back table. Trent. He was still sitting. He looked at his father's retreating back. He looked at the internship application. He looked at the laughing nurses and mechanics, who were now starting to clear their own plates. Then he did something I had never, in his entire life, seen him do. He stood up, he picked up his own plate, and he walked toward the kitchen. He stopped at the table where the volunteers were stacking dishes. Where does this go?" he asked, his voice rough. A woman, one of the nurses, looked him up and down. "To the sink, and grab a towel. We're washing." I watched him. He stood at the massive, industrial sink. He was awkward. He was clumsy. He was a complete mess. But he was doing it. Mr. Henderson, the machinist, came up behind him, holding a heavy pot. "Here, son," he said gruffly. "You're holding the scraper all wrong. Give it to me. No, like this. You've got to use your wrists. Put your shoulder into it." Trent listened, and for the first time in his life, because he was actually doing something instead of just talking about it, he got a word of praise. "There," Henderson said, with a gruff nod. "You're not terrible. You might just learn something." My internal camera, the one that had been running at high speed for a week, finally, began to slow down. I looked at the great hall. It was no longer a battlefield. It was just a room full of people. I saw the long, oak table, with no head, no foot, just sides. I saw the empty, overturned plates. I saw my mother, sitting with the nurses, a cup of coffee in her hands, and she was laughing. I saw the mechanics and the loggers, passing around the last of the apple tarts. I walked over to my mother. I put my hand on the table. The wood was old, solid, and warm from the fire. She looked up at me, her eyes clear. I didn't take back the old chair. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet. Just for her. I built a new table, and I'm keeping the key on the outside. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so glad we could share it together. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like, and if you can, support us by hitting that hype button. It helps get this story heard by so many more people.